chapter 37, we see the dry bones. He promises a resurrection of Israel and a union of the two old northern and southern kingdoms. In chapter 38, he promises to defeat under the names of Gog and Magog any enemy, no matter how fearsome they may seem. And after he's done all this, he then promises that I'm going to show you a vision of the new temple. And that takes up chapter 40, 41, and 42. Chapter 43, after the temple is supposedly in the vision finished, we see the return of God's glory, which had left back in chapter, I believe it's 8. And maybe that runs through chapter 11. I'm not real positive about that, but right in there. And the glory of the Lord returns by way of the east gate. And that brings us to chapter 43, verse 13, where we talked about the altar, which had been previously mentioned. And Ezekiel now takes time to give us all of the cubits and all of the feet and inches of the altar. And the reason I put the drawing back up is because I don't know if you realize that that altar is, depending upon how you understand the measurements, somewhere between 15 and 20 feet tall. 15 to 20 feet tall. It is a large altar. And I don't think that drawing really, it doesn't hit you that way, but it is a large, and here it is in the context of the north gate, the east gate, and the south gate, and the entrance up here to the holy place and the most holy place, what do we call it, the sanctuary proper. Okay, of course, this is considered here the inner court, and that out there is the outer court, and there's the altar in its place. It's the altar of burnt offerings. And I do want to say this too, and what's coming up in the next chapters, you're going to need, and I hope you already have, some sort of middling knowledge of the Old Testament law concerning sacrifices and other things that show up in the books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, because we are going to refer to those or be reminded of those over and over again as we go through the chapters that are in front of us. And I bring that up because we're going to be dealing with sacrifices, which is natural, because after you've got the altar, then he is going to tell us about the sacrifices.
That picture of the temple shows that it steps out larger from bottom to top.
This one?
The temple.
These temples?
The temple up above, with the wall.
Yes.
The wall on the outside. That's the temple.
Go back to the glory graph. And go a little left. More left.
Here, come here.
Just max the button.
Right there.
Yeah.
It steps in. Every story is stepping out farther.
Well, it actually
It
expands
goes
as
the other direction, doesn't it?
it expands as it goes up. The reason that I didn't cover that is because I didn't understand how it worked.
Well, in other pictures, you see that it's stepping in. What you
Talking about
showed us
size.
last week. Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes you showed us last week. Growth up there is what it means. Because it was showing it stepping in, and I had always wondered how that looked. And that was does. I mean,
No,
as you said,
and this is not made by the same people that made the video.
Okay.
Okay, there's lots of interpretations about what this looks like. It's 3 stories with porches and stairways, and,
Okay.
But it was handmade.
I'm sorry?
So it was
handmade.
right. Right, it was all vision anyway.
Yeah, but it was Greek to me. Hebrew to me. More specifically. No, really, I read 3 or 4 translations, and I never could make any sense out of it. And I checked the drawings, and I could see that I was not alone.
Right.
So,
Okay.
your concern is well grounded. Let's see, 43:18. Then he said, by the way, having given the details about the construction for the altar, the Lord tells Ezekiel that he is now going to be told how to use the altar or the proper sacrifices to be offered on it. And you can tell by the specifics that we have dealt with the foot and the inches and the measurements and everything, that he means it to be done down to the level. Then he said to me, verse 18, Son of man, this is what the Lord God says. These are the statutes for the altar on the day it is constructed, so that burnt offerings may be sacrificed on it, and blood may be spattered on it. You are to give a bull from the herd as a sin offering to the Levitical priests, who are from the offspring of Zadok, who approach me in order to serve me. This is the declaration of the Lord God. You are to take some of its blood and apply it to the 4 horns of the altar. I hope you saw those. One on each corner. As it was in the temple and the tabernacle, you are to take some of the blood and will apply it to the 4 horns of the altar, the 4 corners of the upper ledge, and all around the rim. In this way you will purify the altar and make atonement for it. Then you are to take away the bull for the sin offering, and it must be burned outside the sanctuary in the place appointed for the temple. Now what struck me was 43:18. The words, on the day it is constructed. I read that and scratched my head. And I said to myself, if this is a vision, why would he make that statement? It appears from this that the Lord expects what? That the temple is to be built. I mean, because he mentions the day that the altar is constructed, you wouldn't construct the altar without having a temple to place it in.
They're gonna construct it in a day?
I'm sorry?
They're gonna construct it in a day?
No, that means when it is constructed, on the day when it is finished, or, yeah. On the day it's constructed would mean the first day that we use it after it's finished, technically. Let's see. Yeah, and we pick up the second day, by the way. That first day is in verse 18, and then in 22 we pick up the second day. And what he's mentioned here is, let's see, you are to take, verse 21, you are to take away the bull for the sin offering, and it must be burned. He mentions burns sin offering in verse 19, and again in verse 21. Sin offering. By the way, for those of you with an NIV study Bible, especially if you've got an older one, it's on page 188. It's where I got this information. It was the best condensed description of the sacrifices that I could find. The sin offering, those are the scriptural references, Leviticus, all of it's in Leviticus, of where you can read all about the details of the sin offering. What are the elements? A young bull for the high priest and the congregation. A male goat for the leader, whoever he may be. female goat or a lamb is the sacrificial animal for the common person, a dove or a pigeon for the poor, and a tenth of an ephah of flour, which I think about 2 quarts, my memory's correct, somebody correct me on that, for those who are very poor. Do you see an order as you go down through the value of the animals? You remember what Joseph and Mary had to offer? You have pigeons because they were poor. So the sacrificial offering, requirements for a sin offering are based upon how much you have been blessed with. Purpose, mandatory. That means it's required. You do not have a choice. You are required to. For specific unintentional sins, you accidentally fall into something. Some translations use the word naive. I think the King James has, known it all my life, and it just flew away. It's a cute little term anyway. Purpose for the confession of sin, that unintentional sin, and to have that sin forgiven and to be cleansed from defilement. Now, what sacrifice is available for high-handed or intentional deliberate sin? That's interesting. There is none. You can't go out and deliberately do something that you know is wrong and then take your male goat or female goat or lamb to offer a sacrifice and expect God to forgive you for it when you knew what you were doing in the first place. There is no offering for that at all.
No indulgences.
Yes, no indulgences. So that's the sin offering, and in verse 18 is mentioned a burnt offering, and there's the references for it. The elements of the burnt offering: a bull, a ram, or a male bird, dove, or a young pigeon for the poor. It is put upon after it's skinned. It is put upon the altar and totally consumed, and the word used for that is holocaust. It's completely burned up, and no defects are allowed on any animal offering for a burnt offering. The purpose, it is voluntary. It is for the atonement of unintentional sins in general. Expression, it is an expression or a commitment and expression of complete surrender to God. Again, it is voluntary. If you committed an unintentional sin, the sin offering is mandatory. But this is at the discretion of the worshiper, or the one bringing the sacrifice. Now, what they would do is take, for instance, the bull to the gate of the outer court, hand it to one of the Levites in this vision, and it would be the Levite's job to slaughter it. Yes, I didn't get all the details, yes, but that's in there. Yeah, you lay your hands on it. By means of that, you transfer, in a sense, the sin that you have committed to the animal, and the animal pays the price for what you did. And it's also an acknowledgement that you do have sin to confess and to transfer. You broke my train of thought.
Broken train.
Yes, we've got a broken train. Any questions on these two? We've got 3 more, but we won't look at them right off the bat. I've got the slides together, but we don't need to look at them. They would, and then some of the Levites would be responsible for cutting it into pieces and getting it ready to be put on the altar. And we will see some of that a little bit later. We will, let's see. 19. Now, looking at the mention of the priests and the Levites, does somebody know the difference between the two?
Levi is the whole tribe, and the priest is one of Aaron's family.
Very good. Priests are Levites, but not all Levites are priests. That's a very good way to say it. The tribe of Levi, you remember, was given no inheritance land-wise in Israel because the Lord was going to be the tribe's inheritance, meaning that he would be the one serving in the tabernacle and then later in the temple, and he would, the followers of, the descendants of Aaron, Moses' brother, would be the priestly line. Now, how do you become the high priest? You would be the eldest son in that line, and that's how that was supposed to be done. But the priests have to be from Aaron, not just simply Levi. Must be from Aaron's line within the tribe of Levi. Only the priests could go into the inner court. Only the priests. And they have to be from the offspring of Zadok. And those who were not from Zadok were barred from serving for reasons that will be stated in the next chapter in 44 verse 10. By the way, something else we're going to notice about these various sacrifices and laws. They do not always, in fact, they only part of the time match what the law of Moses said. That's Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy principally. There's no provision or effort made to say, just go back and pick up Leviticus 26:14, and then you'll know how to do this, because many of the laws changed. Many of the laws have been expanded. Many of them have been reduced. So just because Ezekiel lays down the law for the sacrifices and for some of the defilements and blessings, they may or may not match what was in the law of Moses, which is, to me, quite striking. Verse 21, they are to make atonement. Now, the concept of atonement is the idea of wiping away of the impurities and sins that adhere to a person or an object. And the purpose is to make amends, to forgive, and to reconcile. So I hope everybody has a grip on the idea of making atonement. And any questions upon these verses? I wonder where 43:22 is. There. Okay. On the second day, you know what the first day was. You are to present an unblemished male goat as a sin offering. They will purify the altar just as they did with the bull when it was offered. When you have finished the purification of the altar, you are to present a young unblemished bull and an unblemished ram from the flock. And I think I've got, that's for a burnt offering. Verse 24, you are to present them before the Lord. The priests will throw salt on them and sacrifice them as the burnt offering to the Lord. You will offer a goat or a sin offering each day for 7 days. A young bull and a ram from the flock, both unblemished, are also to be offered. For 7 days the priests are to make atonement for the altar and cleanse it. In this way they will consecrate it. All of these sacrifices are simply for one purpose, and that's to get that altar they just finished cleansed, purified, and ready to use. And that's what everything we looked at sacrificially is for the purpose of. That's while we're doing it. Thus you will consecrate it, verse 26, verse 27, and complete the days of purification, which are apparently 7 in number. We've run across that number enough. Then on the 8th day, which is the first day, as I understand it, of the normal routine, and afterwards the priest will offer your burnt offering and fellowship or peace offering on the altar, and I will accept you. This is the declaration of the Lord. Let's go back just a minute. Burn offerings out. Okay, fellowship or peace offering is mentioned in verse 27. There's the references in Leviticus. The elements, any animals without a defect from the herd or flock, and it also includes with it a variety of breads. That comes from a grain offering, and we will see that purpose again, voluntary. Thanksgiving and fellowship purpose, and it included a communal meal. Now, that's not all the details, folks. That's just a summary
Is
of
it the
those.
wave offering too? Is it called wave offering, this one?
I think so. Or heave offering, yeah. That's it. Let's see, what else we got here? Oh, okay, that's it. Back up. Okay. Let's see. Salt, for instance, I talked about some differences. Moses' law commanded salt only with the grain offering. So this is another departure from the law that God gave to Moses.
Everything is a piece of, with salt with everything, that be at another place.
I think so, yeah. And of course, salt is recognized as a preservative. And why Yahweh, God wants that, I do not know, but that's the way He wants it. Now, when it says in verse 24, before the Lord, He's talking about in front of that altar. Verse 26, it's interesting here that nothing is said in the entire passage about the consecration of the priests. And that's because they apparently it's because they were consecrated back during the days of Moses and Aaron. And there was no need to reconsecrate them because Zadok was from that line. So apparently, they didn't
Did
see.
they, when Solomon's temple, did they consecrate the priests then too?
I don't remember.
I mean, I know they did for the altar and all of that.
Yeah.
For the temple.
Yeah, I just find it interesting that they didn't mention the priests. I mean, they could have, but it's not in the vision if they did. So the verse 27, the regular sacrificial offerings begin. Let's see. All right, any questions on chapter 43? Because we're going to move on to 44.
So,
Go ahead.
so, it says for 7 days, I know this, the significance is 7, but is it really 7 days, so you're not gonna be like resting on the
No.
Sabbath then?
No, we will do it 7 straight days. Yeah. I don't think the temple rituals didn't stop with the Sabbath.
In fact, Jesus says, in his answering to the Pharisees about him healing on the Sabbath, his disciples eating grain, he said, don't you remember that David and his men had consecrated bread without falling under condemnation, and the priests that serve on the Sabbath day break the Sabbath, but it's okay for them.
Yes.
Jesus brings that up in Mark.
Yeah. No, the work in the temple continued without a break. Sabbath was not observed in the way the common people had to observe it at all. That work, sacrificial laws that included 7 days, and every day, 2 lambs in the morning and 2 lambs in the evening. That didn't stop on the Sabbath day at all. Questions?
In Numbers 18,
Numbers 18.
19, he's talking about offerings to priests and the Levites. He says in verse 19, whatever is set aside for the holy offerings, the Israelites present to the Lord, I give to you your sons and daughters as a regular share. It is an everlasting covenant of salt before the Lord for both you and your offspring.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay. Okay. Maybe that was intended to be permanent. I don't know. Chapter 44. Yes.
Does the Bible tell us who decided who was the poor, the very poor?
You don't have to speak up.
I can't.
Does the Bible tell us does the Bible tell us how they decided the difference between the poor and the very poor?
Between the what?
The poor and the very poor.
No, I do not. It does not. I don't recall anything you said about having an income line.
Just wonder, like, now, somebody that has a lot of money may not have wanted to give up a goat, so they may have tried to do flour instead.
I am sure that would have been looked down upon. Same thing might have happened to them that happened to Ananias and Sapphira. We're trying to, there's no record of anybody trying to sneak in with a lower level sacrifice. You think Bill Gates coming here with a couple of doves and pigeons? Yeah, I think he'd be caught.
Though, he said that they were robbing him because they gave blemished animals.
Yes.
When they had it, so it did go on. God called them out.
That's a good point.
But then he would have accepted the offering anyway, had that been, I mean, it's all, just because you're giving the sacrifice doesn't mean that God has to accept it, it's said
That's-
correctly or wrong.
That's correct. No, the priests in Malachi's day were happy to offer blemished animals. Why? Because the priests lived off of the sacrifices, partially, of their brothers and sisters. And so to turn one down means that I don't get all the food that I'm supposed to get.
They all eat the same.
Okay.
Lame or not, they still taste the same.
Verse chapter 44. This chapter gives us the regulations to prevent any violent or desecration of this temple that we've seen the vision of, such that might force God to turn around and leave again. He's already done that once. And these regulations refer to both the prince, whoever that is, and the priesthood. And it was through these two groups that Israel was led mainly into sin. So let's look at chapter 44. Then, Ezekiel says, he brought me back by the way of the outer gate of the sanctuary, which faces east. I hope I've got a slide here. Yes. Okay. That's the one we're talking about. There's the sanctuary in this verse. And boy, did this one get me in trouble. And I could be wrong on this one again. He brought me back by the way of the outer gate of the sanctuary, which faces the east, and it was shut. The Lord said to me, this gate shall be shut, it shall not be opened, and no one shall enter by, for the Lord God of Israel has entered it. Remember when his glory returned? Just recently. Therefore it shall be shut, As for the prince, he shall sit in it as prince to eat bread before the Lord. He shall enter by way of the porch of the gate and go out the same way. This, whether it's this east gate or this east gate, has given me a lot of trouble. I finally settled for this one, and I'll try to remember to give you the verse or two that led me to that conclusion. But the Levites are never allowed within this precinct at all. They serve out here. Never in here. Nobody else, except for the descendants of Aaron, the priests, are ever to go in there. And that is only for the people who have proven themselves to be faithful and obedient to the Lord, which reminds us of this verse. Who may ascend into the hill of the Lord? And who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to falsehood, and is not sworn deceitfully. Because we are about to find out that a large group of Levitical priests are going to have their privileges reduced or revoked, if you please, because they did not remain faithful to God, haven't been over the years. And if you remember back in chapter 8, when we came in there and looked at all of the abominations that were going on inside the temple, that is an example of the faithlessness of the priests who were serving in the temple at the time.
They weren't saying a thing about it while it was going on. They didn't.
No.
They didn't do anything.
No.
The fact that the prince is in which gate it would be, I would assume that the fact that he is eating the sacrifice inside it would mean did the sacrifice have to be eaten within the temple? It couldn't go outside.
No, it could not. Are you thinking it might be this gate?
No, I'm saying it's probably not that gate.
Okay.
That is outside of the outer court.
Yeah. Let me tell you how I understand it. He says, let's see, where do we go? As for the prince, he's verse 3. Let me get back to verse 3. Therefore it shall be shut. He shall sit in it as prince and eat before the Lord. He shall enter by way of the porch of the gate and shall go out the same way. This is how I understand it. Please let me know if I'm wrong. It'd be nice if I had the drawing. My understanding is that the priest is going to have to come in into this gate or this gate, probably this north gate, go inside this gate, the east gate, but not go out of it because it's shut. And he has to do his eating. He does his eating inside the gate. When he's through eating, he leaves this way and goes out the same way that he came. I think.
This does not have a court for the Gentiles,
The women.
the women, that the temple itself did, and also the temple during Herod's time.
No court of the Gentiles and no court of the women, which is, you'll see it referred to in the New Testament in Herod's temple. This one,
The king, if only the priests and Levites can enter this temple, on all of its grounds, then the king himself couldn't come in. So this prince would not be talking about the king.
I don't think it is talking about a king. Actually, the word translated prince, some are adamant that it ought to have been translated simply leader. This gate shall be shut, and then we learn in chapter 46 The gate of the inner court facing east shall be shut 6 working days, but it shall be opened on the Sabbath day and open on the day of the new moon. So, until we get there, we think that it's never going to be opened, and then we find out a couple of chapters later that yes, there are some exceptions. As far as who the prince is, I don't know who he is. I just know he has a gracious privilege to be able to go inside this inner court here. That's the inner court, and in that gate. He is the only non-priest who is given that, what I would consider a great honor. Okay? And there's nothing like this in the law of Moses in the Old Testament. Nothing. Let's see. Oh yeah, there's the verse that I just told you about where the exception is to the gate being shut all the time. Okay. Okay, these are a couple of the duties of the prince that we will find out about soon enough. And I'm not sure why that slide is there. Let's go on to verse 4. Then, after that, he brought me by the way of the north gate to the front of the house. I assume he went out that north gate, back around to the east gate, on the outside of the east gate, the shut east gate. And I looked, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. That's one reason I think it was the inner court gate, because he could see apparently quite well the glory of the Lord in there. It'd be a lot easier to see it from there than it would have been that outer east gate. And when I saw that, I fell on my face, just like he did in chapter 1. The Lord called and said to me, Son of man, mark well, see with your eyes and hear with your ears all that I say to you concerning all of the statutes of the house of the Lord and concerning all its laws. And then again, mark well, or pay a special attention to the entrance of the house with all exits of the sanctuary. Now, why would he be so concerned about the entrances and exits?
These were the places that screened out people that weren't supposed to be there.
Right. We've got to keep anything unholy or polluted out of the house, because you have done such a poor job before. I want to emphasize that this temple is going to be kept holy. We're not going to allow priests who have been guilty of idolatry in the previous years, nor foreigners, in here any longer. Okay, concerning all of its laws, and that's the laws concerning to me, and I understand it to be who is admitted and who is refused entrance to the house. Because remember what happened before, God's presence, continued presence, depends upon them making sure that the proper people get in, and only the proper people. Let's see, it's 8 o'clock. Any questions? I hope I didn't confuse more than 2 or 3 of you, because we're going to continue with these Old Testament references. Why? Because we have built another temple. And so we're going to continue with Old Testament-like references. All right, let's pray. Our Father, again, we ask you for wisdom in studying your word and learning its meaning. We thank you for Jesus, and we pray for you to send us some rain and always be gracious to us. In Jesus' name, amen.